Good evening.
Kavod Haraf, how are you?
Thank God, Baruch Hashem.
Baruch Hashem.
All right. Okay, so going to Dalet. It says in the Torah, Ve'im amar morid hageshem b'yemot hachama machazin oto. It says, right, that if he said to bring down the rain in the summer, right, which is the wrong thing because we don't want rain in the summer, so we tell him to go back and pray again. That's what says the Torah. Memra de Rav Chanina. So where does this come from? It says Bet Yosef. It comes from Rabbi Chanina in the Gemara. Sham u'v'samuch itbaer. So it says we're going to explain close by. Im haynu dafka keshizkir geshem velo tal. Does that mean that he mentioned the rain but not the dew? Or afilu keshizkir tal v'gam ken? Or does that also mean that he also mentioned the dew? Katav Rabbeinu Yonah. Says Rabbeinu Yonah. Perek Tfilat HaShachar. Over there in this perek, which is in Brachot, Yutet Amud Bet, it says there, Shafilo b'makom shetzichin geshem, even in a place where they need rain, in the summer, im yizkir geshem b'makom tal, if he mentioned rain instead of the dew, machazinoto, we still tell him to go back and pray again. Sheim hem tzichin legeshamim, because if they need rain, you can ask also in Shomei Tfilah. If you forget, right, to ask in Barech Aleinu, which is the place that we ask usually, right, you can go to Shomei Tfilah and ask over there. That's the second option, right? You don't have to go back all the way to the beginning of the prayers. Okay, very nice. So then he says, says, don't change the format, right, that the rabbis made in the prayer. Like I say in the first parak of Tanit, right, regarding the dwellers of Nineveh, which was an ancient city in Assyria. Katav says Radaran, Tanit, in the beginning of Tanit, this is the first Aleph Amud Bet, Al Yerushalmi Deit Palel, that it says in Yerushalmi, the Gemara there, that a person, he prayed, he forgot what he mentioned, right? Doesn't know if he mentioned the rain, didn't mention the rain. So it says, regarding that, we deduce like this. Right? The question is, why didn't we tell him to go back when it comes to the summer? 30 days. If he mentioned the rain, so it says, isn't it true that the truth is that the first month is not really a sign of curse? So then why do we tell him to go back and pray again? Unless, right, that Nisan has already finished, the month of Nisan. Even though he added something and said, right, something that which was not decreed, that he passes the wind and brings the dew. It wasn't decreed to say these things. But if he said so, we don't make him to go back. So that's he's asking a question. So he says he can answer like this: since most of the time, that when you stop asking for rain, it's considered to be a curse to have rain. Lo plug rabbanan. So therefore, the rabbis didn't make a differentiation. They made the whole variant there, right? One uniform halakha. There we go. Okay, so what's the answer? As we said, right? The answer is that since the rabbis made the decree, they made it like uniform. They don't want to make differentiation between the first month, the second month, third month. As we said. The Amrei says that, and they said, so therefore, the rabbi said, from a time that you stop asking for rain, right, Geshem, therefore, so we tell them to go back and pray again. Even though, logically speaking, we could have done otherwise, but that's the way the rabbis made it. Okay, so then he goes on. That which he said, right? It goes back to the beginning of the blessing. But if he already finished the blessing, right? Then he goes back to the beginning. That's what the Torah said. So he said that's what it says in the Rosh, like that. Also Mordechai, B'Shem Ravia, and name of the Ravia. Says the Rambam in Laws of Prayers, im ta'abi mutachama. He made a mistake in the summer. And he mentioned the rain, right? He asked for the rain. He mentioned the rain. He has to go back to the beginning. So it implies from his words that he has to go back to the beginning, right? Either way. But he says from here, we push out the words of the Mordechai that he wrote, Rabbi. It seems to, he says, my rabbi, we don't tell him to go back to the beginning of the blessing. So what we do is we just object. We verbally object against him. You shouldn't say anymore, right? Warn him not to do it again. So he says, why? Because it's really like wondrous to say, we tell him to go back to the beginning of the blessing altogether. How does that help you? Didn't he already say it? So if he already said it, right? What does it help you to go back now and repeat it? Interesting. That's the end of the language there. So he says, what's halacha? Bottom line, right? With all these opinions, where do we wind up, right? To the end? So it's Psok halacha ben Rambam merosh nireh lepsok rosh teravia mesayele. So he says, since it's a machloket between the Rambam and the Rosh, so he says here it seems like we should go like the Rosh. Why is that? Because the Ravia also supports him, So the Rosh has somebody on his side, right? As opposed to the Rambam who has nobody. So therefore he goes like the Rosh. So another thing he says, which is that the words of the Rambam are not so clear. So therefore, right, better to paskin like the Rosh, and that's the halacha, bottom line. Okay, so we're going to see the Shulchan Aruch here. Very interesting. Says the Shulchan Aruch, if he said, right, the rain in the summer, right, we have to tell him to go back. He made a mistake there, right? You don't mention rain in the summer. As we said, what's the reason why? Because it's harmful in the summer, right? Now, we're not talking here about, in America, because the rain comes all the time. We're talking about in Eretz Israel, right? Over there, it's harmful. So we go according to the qualities of Eretz Israel more. That's the main land, right, in this world, right? The real land of this world is Eretz Israel. All the other lands are just like, subsidiary, right? They're not so important, So therefore, Eretz Israel, right? Everything goes according to what's going on over there. So since in Eretz Israel it's harmful to have rain in the summer, therefore, if he mentioned it, we tell him go back. The question is, where do you go back, right? So he says, right, you should go back. You go back to the beginning of the blessing, right? Again, say it again without rain this time. So as if like you corrected it, you kind of like wiped it out. You wiped it, you wiped the slate clean there by repeating it again without rain. But if you didn't remember until you finished the blessing already, so then he's got to go back to the beginning, right, of the prayers altogether, because there's no way to correct that anymore. What's the reason why you can't correct that? Because the first three blessings of the Amidah are considered to be like one unit, So once you make a mistake there and you finish, you seal the blessing, gotta go back to the beginning, right? There's no other way. Okay. So it's even in a place where they need, right, rain in the summer. As we said, right, in other countries, rain can be fine for the summer, no problem. If you mention the rain, nevertheless, instead of mentioning the dew, we still tell them to go back. So even if you live in a country where the rain is beneficial in the summer, we still tell them to go back. That's what he says. Because the main thing is Eretz Israel. It says also, if he mentioned, says in the parentheses here, I think it's a Ramah, whatever it is, even if he mentioned the rain and the dew, he says we tell him to go back also there. So what does that mean, right? The fact that you mentioned rain already disqualifies you. Whatever else you did, it's not really so relevant. So therefore, you got to go back and pray again. Okay, very good. If you have any questions, let me know. Otherwise, we'll go on to the next one, which is hey. Okay, so it says in the Torah, if he didn't say, right, the rain, in the rainy season, right, which is the winter, so then we tell him to go back. Same thing, right? So you didn't mention something that he has to mention, so therefore he has to go back. So says Bet Yosef, it's also from Rabbi Chanina there, the Gemara, Gimel Amud Bet. Right, and then he goes on. That's only when, as we mentioned yesterday, right? That's only if you didn't mention the dew. But if you mention the dew, we don't tell him to go back. As we said, right? That's the advantage of the people who mention the dew in the summer, because this way they don't have to go back and pray again if they made a mistake in the winter. Harif hevi sham Yerushalmi. So he says the Rif brings the Yerushalmi there. Right? It says there, Rabbi Zera b'shem Rabbi Chanina. It says these rabbis. Haya omed begeshem, right? So what happened was that if he was, he's telling you, right, that if he was standing in the rain, shiltal. So what does that mean? He was, in the rainy season, right? Doesn't mean he was walking in the rain. He was during the rainy season, right? And he mentioned the tal, he mentioned the dew. So en machazinoto, we don't tell him to go back. Betal, what to do. I'm sorry, just the I didn't say it right. But if it was the time of the dew, right, the meaning more, it was the summer, and he mentioned the rain, that we tell him to go back. And he objects over there, right, if he was in the rainy season and mentioned the dew, we don't tell him to go back. But we learn it right. If he didn't ask for rain in the Barachenu, Barech Aleinu, or Shelo Amar Begivurot HaShamim, or he didn't mention the rain, B'tchilat HaMetim, right, in the second blessing, we tell him to go back. So it seems to contradict what we just said. So what's the halacha? Ha'ul de lo adkar lo tal velo matar. So he says, the Gemara answers, there's no contradiction. Over there, we're talking about, he didn't mention the rain or the dew, so therefore we tell him to go back, right? But if he mentioned the dew, as we said, right, that's something different. We don't tell him to go back, because dew has, similar qualities like rain. What does that mean? It's all moisture, it's all water, right? So, similar. Katva Rosh, so it says the Rosh, Pek Tfilat HaShachar, he writes it there. Upiresh Klomar, he explains that it means to say, Im lo izkir klal. Right? If he didn't mention it at all, Machazinin oto, then we do tell him to go back, as we said. But if he mentioned the do though, in Machazinin oto, then we don't tell him to go back, as we mentioned. So even though the Ran, right, was wondering about the words of the Rif, Shepasak Yerushalmi, he passed like Yerushalmi. Hazeh, right? This Yerushalmi that we just read, the Mashma the Talmud Didan Pali, because why? It's implied in our Talmud that he argues with this. Therefore, he says the Ravad was also wondering about this. In other words, what's the story, right? You go like the Yerushalmi and you don't go like the Bavli, as we said, right? The halakha is like the Bavli. That's the rule. When there's a contradiction, we go like the Bavli, right? So if that's the case, then right, what's going on over here? How did he pass like the Yerushalmi? So he says, but he says he wrote in the name of the Rabbi that since this Rabbi Yitzchak wrote, since he wrote it, we can't push him out. He says, he's like a big rabbi, we don't play games with him. So whatever he wrote, right? We don't argue with it. That's what he's trying to say. By the way, that shows that the proper thing to do, it's always taught in the yeshivot, that when you have rabbis who are like many generations before, it's not proper to argue with them. With the earlier authorities, person should never do that. Not in the proper thing. If they said what they said, you have a question on it, you're not comfortable with it, too bad, like swallow your pride and, accept the decree, right? Because he was 500 years before you, what business do you have to argue with him? What kind of thing is that? It's not proper to do that.
Can we argue with you, Rabbi?
Only about cars, but not about Torah. I'm joking. Okay. We always have difference of opinion, me and David.
I'm sorry, what was the name of his rabbi again?
Oh, so he says it's Rabbi Yitzchak, right? Yitzchak. Now, who is this Rabbi Yitzchak? Let me just go back and point this out here. Right, so he's talking about the Rif, right? Rabbi Yitzchak Alfasi. The Rif was 1,000 years ago. You want to argue with somebody who was 1,000 years ago?
No.
You got to be joking,
sure.
right?
Not Alfasi, for sure.
You know what I mean? The Rif.
Yeah.
So, the Rif was the first generation of the Rishonim. He was way, way back there, You want to argue with somebody like that, right? Not a good idea. So therefore, just leave it as it is, right? As we say.
Thank you.
Okay. So even though we don't understand, what happened, how did he go like the Yerushalmi, how did he not go like the Bavli? By the way, I have a possible answer for that question, by the way, just from my own thoughts, right? Sometimes there's a rule like this where we say, even though the general rule is, right, when between the Bavli and Yerushalmi, you go like the Bavli, that's the rule. But that's only if it says in the Bavli like explicitly like that, But if it's just implied like that, so then sometimes we prefer what's written in Yerushalmi explicitly, better. So the rule is, also that something explicit is always better than something implied. By the way, I've also seen this in the Bet Yosef regarding something else, which is very interesting. There's, some other case, right, that, I learned, studied, and there's a machloket between the Rambam and the Rashi, right? So generally, right, as a general rule, when there's a machloket between Rashi and Rambam, the Bet Yosef always picks the Rambam. What's the reason why? Because Rashi's commentary on the Talmud is not really so like halachic. It's more like just as explanation, So therefore, it doesn't have so much weight like the Rambam, who's very halachic more, more halachically oriented. So therefore, he usually paskins like the Rambam. But there is one time, right, that he paskins like the Rashi I saw. So the question is, why? What's going on with that? Right? So you know what he says over there? The reason we paskin like Rashi over the Rambam is because Rambam is only implication, and the Rashi is clearly, spelled out. So we always prefer the clear, words more than the implication. This is the reason why. Same thing over here. That's what he's saying over here. Possibly. One possible answer, right? Okay. So anyway, let's go on a little bit. So it's also what he wrote in the name of the Ramban. It seems like the Ramban also agrees with that, right? So we have two big guys, right? We have the Rif and the Ramban, so what are you going to do? Argue with them? Not a good idea. Also, Rambam goes like that, right? So there you go, right? You have three big rabbis, right? So he says, but I'm wondering about one thing. Since we taught over there in the Gemara regarding the dew and the wind, the rabbi is never obligated to say these things. So he says, then if that's the case, right, that we're not even obligated to mention the dew at all, how is it that when you do mention the dew, right, comes in the name of, in the place of the rain and replaces it, b'diavad? How is that? That's what he's asking. Interesting question. Okay, good. So so he answers like this: he says we have to say, since over there in the second blessing, we're not really asking for rain; we're just mentioning the rain, and therefore what? The shevach, just a praise, really, like Kadosh Baruch Hu. We're praising Kadosh Baruch Hu. Granted, right, that lechatchila you have to say, mention the rain. That's what we praise him with, right? Because that's something which is withheld sometimes, But we've all had God forbid, right, droughts. We've seen those in our lifetime, right? There are droughts. Sometimes drought years, there's lack of water, all kinds of issues, right? I already mentioned to you guys that in Israel, they've kind of like solved the problem with droughts, because now they desalinize the water from the ocean, and they're making water from the ocean, drinkable water. And by the way, it's good quality water. It's excellent. It's not the bad quality. So therefore, they kind of like solve the problem. They built like 5 plants like that all over Israel now. So if there's a shortage of water, in the Kinneret, right, the main water is the source over there, or the aquifers, right? They have all kinds of aquifers there. So what they do is they desalinize the water and right, they drink from there. Right? They're using it now, I think pretty much all the time. Right? By the way, it's interesting, that since they started using those plants, to desalinize the water, now the water tastes better in Israel. It's like you hardly need a filter. You open the sink and the water is like clean. There's like nothing there. You can just drink out of the tap. Before that, by the way, the water in Israel was really salty, and really, not really so pleasant to drink. You need like a heavy duty filter to make it drinkable. But now, it's a different story altogether. It's day and night. You can't imagine, what a difference it's made. But unfortunately, there's one bad byproduct, comes from there. The prices go up because those plants cost more to run, than the natural water you get from the aquifers and the Kinneret, right? Obviously. Okay, that's clear. So over here in America, I don't think they've really started doing that so much. They're still like relying on the water because probably they have enough rain here in America to get by. So they don't really need it. I guess that's the whole thing. It's interesting. Like I heard also in Turkey, for instance. they have like a tremendous overabundance of water there. It's a very abundantly, a watery land there. Rainy land. So they don't need nothing. Like they're like totally set. They're set for life. You know what I mean? They have too much water as it is. So there are countries, that have too much water. Everything is different, right? It always changes. Okay, very good. So anyway, right, getting back to our main topic over here. But it says, nevertheless, b'diavad, mikol makom b'diavad, im shavacho betal, if you praise them with the dew, afal pi shemetoch she'eno netzar, even though the dew is not really, doesn't cease, en tzarich litpalel alav. You don't really have to pray for that. Mi'achar sheshibech miha b'davar shehu tzorech ha'olam. Since he did actually, praise something which is needed for the world, en machzin oto, therefore we don't tell him to go back. Aval keshelo shibech lo betal v'lo b'matar. But if you didn't praise him, not with the rain and not with the dew, so then you got a bigger problem, right? So then machzin oto, then we tell him to go back. That's the answer that he gives. Okay, very nice. So let's go on. So he says, that which we said, right? If he mentioned the dew, he didn't mention the rain, we don't tell him to go back. That's only in the second blessing, right? When you just mention it. When it comes to Barech Aleinu, when you actually have to ask for it, that's a different story. Then we do tell him to go back, right? Even though he mentioned the dew over there, whatever, or he asked for dew, right? That doesn't help you. You have to ask for rain only, right? Okay, just like we're going to explain in chapter 117. Okay, beautiful. And it goes on. That which Rabbi Zera said, Batal, right, regarding the dew, right, he was in the time of the dew in the summer, and he's killed Geshem, and he mentioned rain, we tell him to go back, right? It checks over there in the Gemara, but then we learn the Braita, that the rabbis didn't obligate us to mention the dew and the wind. And if he comes to mention it, maskir, he can mention if he wants, it's optional. So he said it doesn't resemble that. That when you ask for it, let me read this one more time. He answers, right? The Gemara answers like this over there, that question. Right. So he says, doesn't resemble the one who prays, and he makes, lacking something there. To the one who didn't pray and didn't make anything lack. So what does that mean, right? The language is not so clear. So therefore the Rosh explains it, right? In this perek, you may have thought, the one who objected, to have the kamar batal ve'izkir shel geshem, the one who said, right, in the summer, he mentioned rain, machzinoto, we tell him to go back, mishum de lo izkir tal, because he didn't mention the dew. Who the machzinoto? You may think that's the reason why we tell him to go back. Therefore, Gemara asks, right, objects. The rabbis didn't really obligate him to, right, to mention the dew. Then why do we tell him to go back? So he says the answer is, right, as we said, right, we mentioned this language here, which was not so clear. Klomar, so Rosh tries to explain this now, right? That which we tell him, right, to go back, it's not because he didn't mention the dew. The problem is that he's, the timing, the season is a time that we don't mention it. We only mention the dew. Tano b'kites, which is in the summer. V'izkir geshem, and he mentioned the rain. Shehu siman klala, which is his curse, right? As we said, at least in Eretz Israel, right? It's not a good thing there. Ve'ainu delo dame ahu de matzle. That's what it means, right? That mikol klamar sheizkir geshamim. It means to say that he mentioned the rains, v'lo benatan, in the wrong season, in the summer. Lahu delo matzle, right? That doesn't resemble the case where he didn't pray, he doesn't say not the dew, not the rain. Okay, interesting. Anyway, that's the way Ran explains. כתב שם, המאירוס, the Rambam, אומר, שאין פירוש הירושלמי ברור. So he says, the explanation of the Yerushalmi is not so clear, בכך. In other words, what the real meaning is, right? As we said, it's very vague language, very. שאילו היה המתרץ בא לתרץ, because if you would have answered, לומר דלא משום דלא עד טל מחזין אותו, that we don't tell him to go back because of the dew, אלא משום דעד קר גשם, it's only because he mentioned the rain, that's the problem. ואפילו כשהזכיר טל, and even if he mentioned the dew, the geshem, and he mentioned the rain, כמה דמחזין אותו, we still tell him to go back because he mentioned rain. לא היה נופל על זה לשון לא דמה לא it doesn't really match up with the language of the Yerushalmi, says, to explain it this way. So he doesn't agree with the Rosh, the way he explained it. So he says, really, the reason of Rabbi Chanina, Mishum, right, the Mekel, because he's lenient, it really means that he's lacking, right? He doesn't mention nothing. Perush the Mekel, Lashon Klala. So he says, it's not a language of lacking, it's a language of curse, he says. And that what you said, right, that he's not praying and lacking. He didn't mention that the reason Rabbi Chanina mishum de mekel hainu mishum de metaretz gufe, the reason of this issue of the mekel, right, which is the curse, because he explains himself, that he holds by himself the mishum shelo izkir tal, because he didn't mention the dew, but izkir geshem, he mentioned the rain. That's why we tell him to go back. But if he mentioned both of them and machazinato, then we don't tell him to go back, right? Okay, so there's different opinions, different ways of approaching this, whatever. Because the rain is not really a sign of curse. It's only a curse where the rains didn't come down beforehand. Oh, okay. But he says once it came down, siman bracha. Then he says actually then it's a blessing, right? These are all kinds of right, the claims that we don't accept all these things. What he's saying here, but anyway, it says but he says if he didn't mention the dew, which is something which is needed in the world, and he mentioned the rain, which is sometimes the curse, sign of a curse, in the summer. Once Nisan has already passed, the katuv. Sorry. So it says the katuv maskiro, and he says the verse mentions it to be a curse. Right, as we said, there's a verse that actually says that once you have rain and right, once Nisan passes, it's a curse there. It's a sign of a curse, as we find in the book of Shmuel. Then we tell him to go back. When says it comes out like this. According to this, that's what we should say, right? And in the summer, that if you mention the rain, right? We tell him to go back. That's only if you didn't mention the dew. But he says that when it comes to the rainy season, right, the winter, so then aval izkir tal b'geshem, but if you mention right the dew and the rain and machzin, we don't tell him to go back. Adkan, that's the end of it. So he says, but even though right this rabbi said what he said, the two Rabbeinu right paskin like the Rosh, his father. He always favors he favors his father's opinion. So he says also the Rambam seems to agree with that. Perk Minchot with the Yud. 10 perk of Minchot Tfilah, of the laws of Tfilah. So that's the halacha, boom, right? So let's see the Shulchan Aruch and we're done. Shulchan Aruch is much shorter than the Bet Yosef. Okay. Let's see what we got here. All right, so the Shulchan Aruch, Bimot HaGeshamim, right? He says in the rainy season, right, which is we call that the winter. Right, or the fall also, right? The fall, winter is rainy season. Even lo amar moed hageshem, he didn't say, right? He didn't mention the rain, the second blessing, right? Machzinato, we tell him to go back, as we said, right? That's the rule. You have to mention the rain. That's only if he didn't mention the dew, as we said, right? About if he mentioned dew, then we don't tell them to go back, as we said, right? Because at least you praise them for something, right? That's why we send the Bet Yosef. You praise them for something, even though it's not the main right issue. But anyway, right, you did something there, you got something done. So therefore, right, once you mention the rain and the dew, and you didn't mention the rain, we don't tell you to go back. And therefore, right, you can continue praying, and right, Shalom I said, right? But the truth is, what he's saying over here, you have to understand one thing. He's talking about a case where you finished the blessing already, But if you didn't finish the blessing yet, second blessing, right, you should mention the rain still, right? You can go back and mention it again. But once you finish it, right, that's already too late. Once you can't do nothing there. So therefore, just go on and finish, right? That's the idea. When is that? When you mention the dew. But if you didn't mention the dew, you got to go back and pray again. Baruch Adonai le'olam, amen, amen. Thanks for coming. Be blessed with wealth, health, happiness. Have a great new year. You should be all, Bezat Hashem, wealthy and find the right shidduch, find the right mates. And refuah shlema, whoever needs refuah shlema, healing, good health, anything can be changed now, right? So if you do teshuvah, you go into Rosh Hashanah, right? And they'll write you a clean slate. Everything will be clean. So here's our chance right now to go in. I always tell people, right, my lectures, the most important way, to avoid, being judged harshly in Rosh Hashanah, because it's really like a harsh, day of judgment, because you get judged for everything. The best way to avoid it is to hear the shofar, right? If you hear the shofar, so then the judgment will be way, way, way reduced. You get a big reduction, right? So make sure you hear the shofar on Rosh Hashanah. The women are not obligated, but the custom is they go also, Why not? If you have a chance, right, to go, try to go. It's not an obligation, but good custom, but here's a clincher, right? That this year, since Rosh Hashanah falls on Shabbat, so we don't do the shofar on Shabbat, We only do it on the second day. On Sunday, we're going to do it, right? But, the question comes up, right, like this, that the main day of Rosh Hashanah is the first day, right? Second day is only rabbinical. The main day is the first day from the Torah. So then, how did the rabbis decree, right, such a thing like this, that we shouldn't do the shofar on Shabbat if it falls on Rosh Hashanah? The story is that the reason why they decreed not to do shofar on Rosh Hashanah, it says in the Talmud, is because you may come to carry the shofar in a place where there's no eruv. So because the rabbis were concerned about that, to carry on Shabbat with a place where there's no eruv, they said, let's cancel out the shofar altogether. That's what they said, right? But it's an interesting question, how do the rabbis do that? I mean, but the shofar saves us from harsh judgment, So how would they, how do they have the guts to do such a thing like that? So, after thinking about it for a few years, came up with an interesting answer. You know what the answer is? The answer is that the truth is, it says in the halakha, if you look in the Shulchan Aruch, right, Choshen Mishpat, it says that you're not allowed to make a bet din on Shabbat, right? We don't make bet din on Shabbat. You're not allowed to. So there you go, right? That's the answer. In other words, when Rosh Hashanah falls on Shabbat, there's no bet din there, because the bet din can't be open on Shabbat. The same rules that we have here, they have also upstairs up there. Just like here, we have no bet din on Shabbat, also they have also over there. So therefore, the shofar is not so necessary. Why? Because the bet din is closed anyway, so there's no accusation. And this is the reason why the rabbis also, were able to decree such a thing like that you shouldn't do shofar on Shabbat, because it's not really necessary, so much. So therefore, you may come to carry. So what we just said, right? Let's skip it altogether. So we'll do the shofar only on Sunday, right, this year. But so make sure, right, you go on Sunday, when you hear the shofar, right, that's the most important element of Rosh Hashanah. It's the only mitzvah which is from the Torah on Rosh Hashanah, pretty much. There's also a couple of other things, but the main mitzvah is shofar, because what happens is, right, that the accusation stops once you hear the shofar. So therefore, make sure you go and you do it, right? I remember, when I was in Israel, I had a good friend, rabbi there, his big rabbi, big chacham. And what he would do is, he would, instead of he had like several ladies in his house, right? His wife, his mother was there, his daughters, so they didn't come to shul, so what would he do? He would take the shofar home, blow for them at home. That's what he would do, what I mean? This way they don't have to go to shul. The main element of going to shul, for women is the shofar. you don't have to really pray in the shul so much. Not so crucial. So he would just go home and blow the shofar for them over there, and Shalom Yisrael. So that's what I do now. Also, I have a shofar here in my closet. I whip it out. I got over here 3 ladies. We can take care of all of them, no problem. God willing. Hashem should give us all the good things. Chazak Baruch, all the best. Laila Tov.
Kavod Harav, thank you so much.
All the best.